In the late 1920s, fascist dictator Benito Mussolini rose to power in the only recently unified Kingdom of Italy. Seeking to earn a place among the greatest European colonizers of the age, like France and Britain, Mussolini increasingly urged imperial expansion, arguing Italy needed an outlet for its booming population. He envisioned a hegemony over the Mediterranean Danubian Balkan region, with further conquests stretching from the Strait of Gibraltar to the Strait of Hormuz. When Hitler invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, Mussolini hesitated to enter the war. It was only on June 10 of 1940, at the very cusp of France's fall, when he felt confident enough to declare war on the Allies. While the war in Europe raged, Mussolini's focus shifted to North Africa, where he dreamed of building a pan-Mediterranean empire that could revive the glory of ancient Rome. Welcome to our new series on the North African campaign of World War II. In this first episode, we will explore the first salvos in the desert conflict, beginning with the 1940 Italian invasion of Egypt. This is episode 1 of our member and Patreon exclusive series on the war in North Africa during World War II. Our kind members and patrons got 25 episodes on the African campaign, followed by the Allied invasion of Sicily and Italy, covering all the major events in this theatre of the World War. If you want to see the rest of the series, as well as more than 250 other exclusive videos, including the series on the Persian Wars, Punic Wars, Reconquista, Pacific War, Eastern Front of World War II, Wars of Austrian and Spanish Succession, and more, as well as get access to our exclusive Discord, see our schedule, and get early access to all videos, join the ranks of our patrons and YouTube members via the links in the description and pinned comment. Thanks to our supporters for allowing us to continue doing our dream job. Mussolini entered World War II in June of 1940 because he did not want to miss the opportunity to seize territory that could be leveraged during negotiations in future peace talks. By June 24th, France surrendered to the Axis powers, and Italy occupied a swath of land along the Franco-Italian border. In addition to these gains in Europe, Mussolini also sought to seize French possessions in North Africa, but was thwarted when demilitarized zones were created in France, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. Thus, Mussolini's only chance of increasing his empire's African territories was by seizing British-held Egypt and Sudan. These British colonies were an irresistible prize indeed, for seizing both would see Italy gain control over all of Northeast Africa, as well as the vital Suez Canal, destabilizing Britain in the process. With dreams of an Italian Egypt in mind, Mussolini ordered the governor of Libya, Marshal Italo Balbo, to plan the invasion. Balbo was unenthusiastic about these orders, believing an invasion of Egypt to be impossible. Since 1936, the Italian army had undergone a 10-year reorganization, now consisting of 24 binary, 24 triangular, 12 mountain, 3 motorized and 3 armored divisions. Despite this, Italy had a serious issue. Her tanks, motor vehicles and wireless communications were inferior, and she had less of them than her enemies. By 1936, 16 divisions out of 67 had been successfully converted to binary divisions, receiving modern equipment. However, the remaining divisions were poorly equipped and lacked artillery, tanks, anti-aircraft guns, anti-tank guns, and motor vehicles. The Italian armoured cars dated back to 1909, while their L3 tanks only had 2 mounted machine guns. Moreover, the M11s were underpowered and thinly armoured, the 37mm gun could not traverse, and the M13 crawled at 9 miles per hour. The Italians had no answer to the British Matilda with its 50mm thick armour and 40mm gun. Even the Italian artillery were all light and ancient. Their infantry was using the Mannlicher Carcano rifle, an 1881 model with low bullet velocity. Moreover, their Brady machine guns were prone to jamming. They would be facing the British 303 Lee Enfield rifle alongside the very reliable Bren and Vickers machine guns. Unlike Italy's ground forces, the Italian Royal Navy, or Regia Marina, was possessed of well-built and well-armed ships, alongside a large fleet of submarines. However, their crews lacked proper training and experience. Moreover, the Regia Marina would be unable to support the invasion of Egypt because of recent submarine losses and a shortage of fuel. Meanwhile, the Italian Air Force, or Regia Aeronautica, had been war-worthy in 1936, but had stagnated greatly since then. While they could sortie, with 84 modern bombers and 114 fighters, the 113 other aircraft were practically obsolete, completely outclassed by British Hurricanes. As of June 10, 1940, Governor Balbo's North Africa Supreme Command consisted of the 5th Army of General Italo Garibaldi in Tripolitania and the 10th Army of Lieutenant General Mario Berti in Cyrenaica. The 10th Army had Squadra 5 for aerial support. Squadra 5 would have 336 aircraft divided into 4 bomber wings, 1 fighter wing, 3 fighter groups, 2 reconnaissance groups, and 2 squadrons of colonial reconnaissance aircraft. British interest in Egypt truly evolved with the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869. After seizing the ancient land of the Pharaohs, Britain made it into a protectorate and fought to keep it during World War I. In 1936, Egypt gained independence from Britain, but the Anglo-Egyptian Treaty gave Britain de facto control over the Suez Canal. Thus, Britain continued to defend the vital route to India and the Persian Gulf oilfields. The defence of Egypt was led by Commander-in-Chief Archibald Wavell. Wavell had at his disposal the Western Desert Force, or WDF, led by Lieutenant General Sir Richard O'Connor. The WDF was supplemented by 8 French-held divisions in Tunisia. France herself would be unable to support the operations in Egypt due to the struggle between Nazi-aligned Free France and the French resistance over control of the French colonies in Africa. The WDF was 36,000 men strong, consisting of 14 non-brigaded battalions of British infantry. These included the 7th Armoured Division, the 2nd New Zealand Division, the 4th Indian Infantry Division, and the 7th Support Group. By June of 1940, the Royal Air Force in the Middle East had 205 aircraft, with a couple of Hawker Hurricanes coming in July. The Royal Navy Mediterranean Fleet dominated the Eastern Mediterranean at this time. Thus, they could support the Western Defence Force by carrying out naval bombardments of Italian positions near the coast. The Italians only had one good all-weather road running along the coast, the Via Balbia, and were reluctant to move far from it. This gave the British an enormous advantage. The British estimated the Italian army numbered over 200,000 strong, heavily outnumbering them. O'Connor's plan to face Graziani was simple. They would perform a fighting withdrawal to drag the Italians beyond their supply lines and then launch a counter-offensive. In the early 1930s, General Rudolfo Graziani built the frontier wire to defend the border of Libya-Egypt to contain the native Senussi Sufi order, which had long fought against the Italians in Africa. This frontier wire ran from El Ramle to Jegbub for 271 kilometers, consisting of Forts Capuzzo, Skega and Jeribub, alongside 4 lines of high stakes in concrete bases laced with barbed wire. Seizing the initiative on June 11th, British patrols began to harass the frontier wire garrison. The 11th Hussars in Rolls-Royce and Morris CS-9s stormed the garrison at Sidi Omar, capturing 70 prisoners. Many of these prisoners had no idea they were even at war. On the 14th, the 7th Hussars captured Fort Capuzzo with help from elements of the 1st Royal Tank Regiment and Gloucester Gladiator fighters of the 33rd Squadron RAF. Simultaneously, the 11th Hussars captured Fort Maddalena. On the 16th, the 10th Army formed the Raggruppamento D'Avenzo to push the British back over the border. Colonel D'Avenzo was attacked by the 11th and 7th Hussars, prompting D'Avenzo to perform a defensive square that was quickly encircled and annihilated. The British destroyed 12 light tanks and 4 guns, as well as killed and captured 100 members of the Italian infantry. For the rest of June, the British patrolled and raided, while demolition teams destroyed Italian ammunition and vehicles at the captured forts. By the end of June, the Italian 10th Army concentrated around Badia to Tobruk, with the Maletti Group spearheading attacks to recapture the forts. On June 29th, the Italians recaptured Fort Capuzzo as the Maletti Group repulsed a British tank and artillery attack. By August 13th, the British raids had ceased, as they now wanted to conserve strength for an expected invasion of Egypt. Initially, Balbo had intended to invade Egypt at the same time that the Nazis were executing their invasion of the British mainland in July of 1940. In preparation for this, Balbo ordered all trucks and M11 and M39 medium tanks from the 5th Army to be delivered from Italy to reinforce the 10th Army. They would cross the frontier wire and seize Sollum once the war was declared. However, Britain had acted first with their raids against the frontier wire, disrupting and ultimately cancelling the plan. On the 28th of June 1940, Balbo died when Italian anti-aircraft gunners shot down his aircraft as it approached Tobruk. Marshal Rodolfo Graziani succeeded him and inherited the invasion order. Graziani was just as reluctant as his predecessor was to launch an offensive into Egypt, but planned the invasion nonetheless. The second plan, scheduled for August 22nd, aimed for a limited advance against Sollum and Shoni el Algerin, employing 3 columns advancing over 3 lines. After taking Sollum, an advance against Sidi Barrani would also be considered. However, this plan ultimately crumbled because the non-motorized infantry would be unable to march in the blazing August summer heat. Hearing this, Mussolini lost his patience and ordered Graziani to invade quickly or be dismissed. Thus, Graziani came up with a third invasion plan scheduled for September 9th, with the capture of Sidi Barrani as its key objective. Per this plan, the non-motorized divisions would advance along the coastal road, attacking through the Halfaya Pass. From there, they would occupy Sollum and then attack Sidi Barrani. A southern column of the Libyan division and the Maletti group would advance along the Deir el Hamrabir al-Rabia Bir Ember trek to outflank the British. The Maletti group would be acting as a flank guard, advancing further southeast through the desert. However, they were given no adequate maps or navigation equipment to do so. Back in 1938, the Italians had developed a revolutionary new doctrine of combined arms warfare based on the lessons learned from the war in Spain and Ethiopia. The doctrine was called the War of Rapid Decision, and the Italian forces in Libya had all the necessary elements to carry it out successfully. The doctrine required speed to perform deep penetrations into the enemy rear and flanks. Graziani had already successfully carried it out in Ethiopia. However, he would not employ these tactics in Egypt. Instead of assembling a fully motorized force to quickly capture a strategic target like Mersa Matruh, which non-motorized units could garrison later, Graziani opted to advance en masse to invade Egypt. This effectively handed mobility to his enemy, limiting his options and making his convoys vulnerable to attacks. On September 9, 1940, Squadra 5 began a war against the RAF. CR-42s clashed with Gladiators over the eastern Libyan and western Egyptian skies, as bombers dropped their payloads on enemy positions. While the war in the air was fought, the Italian 23rd Corps led the 10th Army's advance against Sidi Barrani. The motorized division shuttled forward, using over 650 vehicles, but the non-motorized divisions were forced to march the grueling 97 kilometers on foot. Graziani elected to advance in a mass column along the coastline, so he could oppose enemy counterattacks with the force of numbers, but this left his units vulnerable to aerial and naval attacks. Poor Italian intelligence led them to believe their enemy was much larger, thus Graziani was overly cautious. Despite Squadra 5's efforts, the RAF raided Tobruk, attacked Italian airfields and supply depots, and harassed advancing columns. RAF reconnaissance and Allied radio interceptors successfully easily located all of the Italian advances and discovered that their enemies were plagued with major issues. The Maletti group had become hopelessly lost after departing Sidi Omar, while the Libyan divisions who were accompanying them had abandoned them, turning towards Fort Capuzzo. Moreover, the hot desert winds of the Sirocco were blowing clouds of fine sand, reducing visibility to just a few yards and hampering land and air-based vehicles, which required special oil and air filters to operate in such a climate. The Maletti group's situation was so dire that the 23rd Corps HQ had to send aircraft to aid in their navigation. On the 10th and the 11th, the British Hussars intercepted the Maletti group, trying to delay their advance. The heavy dust shielded the British as they harassed the Italians, but it eventually cleared, allowing the Italians to respond with artillery, tanks and aircraft, brushing the British attackers aside. Despite this, the Maletti group had delayed the entire Italian advance, and the embarrassing situation forced Graziani to change the invasion plan for a fourth time. Now the invasion was set for September 13th, with Sidi Barrani and the area south of it as the objective. Reduced to only 5 divisions as a result of transport shortages, the 10th Army and the Maletti group were to advance en masse along the coastal road to capture Sollum, then head through Buk to Sidi Barrani. From there, the 10th Army would fortify Sidi Barrani while helping transport supplies to thwart expected British counterattacks before an advance could be made against Mersa Matruh. On the 13th, the 1st 23 Marzo Division, crossed the Egyptian border and recaptured Fort Capuzzo as a bombardment was performed against Mesaid before it was also captured. Next, the Italians initiated an artillery barrage, followed by an advance under a rolling barrage against Solim's airfield and empty barracks. As the Italians advanced along the coastal road, the 1st Libyan Division was harassed by the 3rd Coldstream Guards around Solim. Both sides unleashed artillery and aircraft upon each other as the British withdrew towards the Halfaya Pass and the 1st Libyan Division captured Solim. The Italians continued their march, facing more casualties from mines left behind by the British than they had during the actual combat. On the 14th, the Italians approached the Halfaya Pass and were harassed by a company of the 3rd Coldstream Guards, a Northumberland Fusilier platoon, and some artillery. As the Allies continued their fighting withdrawal, the Italians continuously failed to entrap and destroy them. During the night, 2 columns of the 2nd Libyan Division, the 63rd Infantry Sereni Division, the Meleti Group from Mosaid, and the 62nd Infantry Mamarika Division from Sidi Omar converged upon the Halfaya Pass. On the 15th, Italian forces on the escarpment began advancing through the pass, linking up with other advancing units along the road from Solim. A squadron of the 11th Hussars, the 2nd Rifle Brigade, and the 1st Royal Tank Regiment began harassing the Italians on the escarpment. At around noon, British forces began to withdraw along the coastal road to Buk-Buk, where they linked up with the 11th Hussars and a motorized company of Les Troupes de Marine. By the end of the day, the British were continuing their fighting withdrawal to Alam Hamid and then Alam el Dab. The Italian advance continued, though they were suffering heavy casualties and were still unable to pin down and destroy their enemy. On the 16th, elements of the 1st Tank Group followed the 1st and 2nd Libyan Division's advance to Bir Thidan el-Qadim. At Alam el Dab, 50 Italian tanks began a flanking maneuver with the support of motorized infantry and artillery, forcing the Coldstream Guards to withdraw to avoid being surrounded. During the evening, the 1st Libyan Division, 1st 23 Matso Division, and 23rd Corps Artillery were southeast of Sidi Barani. The Meleti Group was still further west, unable to fully participate in the offensive because they faced logistical problems. It was the 1st 23 Matso Division that finally captured Sidi Barani. North of the escarpment, the British forces pulled back to the coastal road as the RAF and Squadra 5 performed fighter sweeps and aerial bombardments against each other's forward airfields and defensive positions. By the end of the battle, the Italians had suffered 120 deaths and 410 wounded, with a large number of tanks and motorized vehicles being destroyed, damaged or lost to mechanical failures. In contrast, the British had suffered 40 deaths and a large number of wounded. Moreover, they had lost 10 tanks, 11 armoured cars and 4 lorries. Throughout the conflict, the motorized elements of the 10th Army, the 1st Libyan Division, and the 1st 23 Matso Division all failed to act properly, having lacked proper preparation, training and organization. The mechanized forces simply did not synchronize well with the infantry. Thus, they were unable to trap and destroy more of the enemy. The British had expected the Italians to make a large flanking maneuver further south of the coast, and concentrated most of their forces south of the escarpment. Thus, it was only the Coldstream Guards, alongside some artillery on the coast, that were left to face the main weight of the Italian invasion. The British assumed the main fight would be at Mersa Matruh, so Wavell began pulling troops back to that position. However, the Italians stopped at Sidi Barani and Safafi. They began to dig in, forming an arc south to the southwest, building fortified camps at Maktila, Tumar, Bebewa, and on top of the escarpment around Safafi. To his rear, Graziani positioned his divisions at Buk-Buk, Sidi Omar, and Halfaya Pass. The Italians had stretched their supply line and needed time to build up new forward logistical supply bases. Graziani sent word to Mussolini, claiming the British had retired in disorder after losing half their armour. The truth was that the British had fought a fighting withdrawal the entire way to Mersa Matruh. Another truth was that Graziani could not push his army further than Sidi Barani. They were now hundreds of miles from their main supply port of Tripoli, their logistical line stretched to its extreme. Graziani began requesting further armour and supplies, and had his men repair the damaged coastal road. He renamed it the Via della Vittoria from Bardia and began the construction of a water pipe. Graziani was building up his logistical capabilities and mechanized forces for a drive against Mersa Matruh, which he was aiming to execute in mid-December. Meanwhile, a very frustrated Mussolini continuously prodded him to continue the advance. Graziani understood and had successfully utilized the War of Rapid Decision doctrine, yet he chose to fall back onto an advance en masse for the invasion of Egypt. This decision ultimately lost Italy the initiative and their chance of winning the war for North Africa. In our next episode on the North African campaign of World War II, the British will turn the tides and begin a push to regain ground. To ensure you don't miss that, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.